My name is Kasia Odrozek. I spent most of my career working in open source environment. I started at Wikimedia, and then I spent 8 years working at the Mozilla Foundation, being a director of an insights team, doing research around what healthy internet is and trustworthy AI. And towards the end, I specialized quite a lot on the notion of data stewardship that you may have heard of. It's about governance of data, such as data trust, data commons, and so on. And then one of the last things before I left, we did a dataset convening on open datasets for LLM training, as that topic was kind of exploding with the emergence of ChatGPT. And that convening resulted in a research paper of best practices, and this is going to be my topic today. I'm going to flank it a little bit more with a more inspirational story of moving from impossibility to possibility, and what I think the open ethos has to do with it. Just very shortly, what I do right now is something a little bit different. Happy to talk about it later over drinks. Right now I'm working for UNESCO, managing a business council for ethics of AI. So I'm basically working with the big companies such as Salesforce, Microsoft, Universal, and so on the AI adoption. They are kind of committed to implement the UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics. Sometimes it's frustrating, sometimes it's hopeful. It's a very different corner of the ecosystem, but it helps me also to see the bigger picture, which is important when thinking about open source as well. Right, maybe I skip that to be faster. So what I find kind of frustrating, and that's why I wanted not to talk only about the research, but also this inspirational story from impossibility to possibility, is that right now the AI ecosystem is moving so fast. Also the notion of openness is changing, but we are kind of being forced into the narrative of this AI exceptionalism you might have heard of, where the big companies and Silicon Valley and so on is pushing the AI is such a transformative and powerful and new technology is going to change everything. So probably we don't need to regulate, we don't need to really build on what we achieved already in terms of human rights, in terms also of open source and so on. And that's, of course, the wrong narrative. And I think also we've been told a little bit by the biggest players who are building it, what is possible and what is impossible, right? What can be done and what cannot be done. And in terms of a data set, and that's what part of this talk is about. I remember 2 years ago when Sam Altman actually said it is impossible it would have been impossible to train an LLM on openly licensed data. That, of course, in the context of the many copyright violations. And just to sketch a little bit of the landscape right now and how it evolves, why no one releases the data anymore? You might remember that actually releasing and sharing training data set was common practice. Google was doing this with C5, it was Llama 1 and so on. But with the explosion of the generative AI, the increased competitive pressure, as we all know, we are in the race right now to capture the market and be the first, and also the legal risk have made it actually unheard of right now for most of the developers to release the data sets or even describe them, which is, of course, something that is a big impediment in terms of transparency, in terms of reproducibility, in terms of accountability, and so on. So I think as there is ecosystem of open source developers, and so it's like we can do and we should and we can actually do better. And I would like to kind of zoom in on the open source AI lab that was mentioned in the presentation before, Alluter AI, with whom I work quite a lot, because they are the ones on the kind of forefront of making it their task to proving that that thesis wrong. What's also happening that you might be aware of, that as the generative AI become more and more prominent, a lot of websites, a lot of open web repositories started closing access. They didn't want their website to be scraped and added to the training data sets and to add to this huge asymmetry in terms of rewards. And there is this famous research by Shane Longpre from MIT Constant in Crisis, you might be familiar with, that was showing the rapid decline of AI data commons. And of course, this is a problem because the pro-social uses often became a collateral damage in the process. This is the headline above is the one from, I think, like a month ago or something, the Cloudflare, who already, I think 1.5 years ago when we were doing the research, was already kind of blocking on demand this AI scrapers. Now, I think a month ago, they changed the whole approach into blocking AI scrapers by default into more a permission-based approach. Making way for a new business model, as they claim, for a lot of publishers and so on. And Cloudflare controls around 20% of the traffic in the internet. And that might be sold, of course, as something great, like giving empowerment and to the publishers and so on. But of course, there are implications of having a commercial company controlling most of that that might be worrisome as well. So that adds to the mess, how to say it. That being said, the dynamics are actually changing, right? Most of this copyright debates and the tension between openness and compensation is being settled in the copyright in the court. Anthropic, there was a very famous settlement of Anthropic with book authors, but also the information loop is changing, and that affects such huge players as, for example, Wikipedia, who now needs to grapple with what will it be its role in the ecosystem, let's say in 2, 3, 5 years, as the kind of information loop is changing. Like the way we consume the knowledge is different right now. It goes mostly through chatbots, not that many people still go on Wikipedia, but maybe not as often. That impacts, of course, how many contributors can they recruit and so on. So all of this is, there are a lot of questions that are, we don't have answers to yet. I don't think we landed on a solution as a bigger ecosystem, but we have to. And I think that's also like a not a wake-up call, but a call for more and more inspirational action from the openness community as the openness notion evolves. And 1.5 years ago, more or less, when I was still at Mozilla, we kind of sensed all of these questions coming, and we organized a series of convening around open source, bringing people together, different actors together to ask exactly the same questions. Not necessarily saying that we will have all the answers, but bringing people into spirit of like future collaboration together. And one of these convenings I organized was around datasets. It was the so-called dataset convening. It was fantastic. As you can see, we're all smiling and laughing on this question, on this picture here. We brought together 30 leaders, Mozilla together with Alluter AI, from Hugging Face, from Playas, which is a French lab, from Cohere for AI, Common Voice, Mozilla's own, and many more, who were actually working on data sets to be used in LLM training. They all were called the publicly available data sets. What that exactly meant, we were kind of, figuring out, as it was mentioned here many times. The notion of openness is in transition, and the definition is in flux. We spent 8 hours together in a closed room with small sandwiches, but we structured this discussion around finding best practices. We wanted people to come together and think like, how do you do it? Nobody has all the answers. How do you do it? What are the problems? What are the challenges? What are the things that are actually working? What are the tools? And it really, when I looked at it later, a lot of these people haven't met before. So that speaks, meeting in person always yields good results. As I saw later on in the field throughout the year, a lot of collaboration being born, at least I think, attributing partly to that convening. What we did is we wrote down a lot of the best practices that we identified during that convening in Amsterdam, and we released this as this paper, which is about best practices for open datasets for LLM training. You see all of these authors, there's quite a lot because there were all of the people who attended that convening. And we structured the conversation. We structured that conversation along the kind of pipeline of production of creating an open data set, such as sourcing, processing, governance in terms of use, identifying the tools, the emerging practices, and what people find useful. And I have to say what kept emerging outside of the pipeline as a very essential part that is missing right now in order to scale up this effort is the encoding preferences in metadata in a way that is machine readable. The data, the public domain data, the openly licensed data is out there, but it's a mess. It's very difficult to understand what are the preferences of the authors. It's very difficult to even find the provenance. It's very difficult to identify the licensing, and solving that issue, standardizing it would help quite a lot. That was really like one of the number one issues that was identified. Across the dataset production pipeline, I'm not going to, of course, read all of this to you. I encourage you to look at the paper or talk to me later on. But the main things that emerged were really the transparency and the documentation and the reproducibility in terms of processing. And on the side of the sourcing and governance, really the engagement with the community, not going for easy translations, adding really the cultural and linguistic and contextual element to the data set, engaging with the communities, which would heighten the quality. And then in terms of governance, of course, tailoring the governance mechanism to data subjects. And that touches on what we already talked about many times, that then the openness is a spectrum. In order to avoid exploitation, not everything can be radically open and open source, as we know that from before. And I wanted just to look a little bit closer at two alleged impossibilities. As I said, the openly licensed data sets, and then the meaningful community governance. It's something that I feel it's almost like a holy grail that we've been talking about as a community for years and years, how to actually give control to the communities, as I said, with data stewardship, data trust, data commons, data co-ops, and so on. But there's really not many meaningful examples that work and scale up. But they could be. So first, the openly licensed data set. What we did here, and that's one of the many graphs that you've seen in the paper, we also tried to discern, like, what are we even talking about when we think about the publicly available data sets. So we created these 3 tiers. The first one is the equivalent to the OSI definition, which is sufficient documentation. It enables the dataset user to understand and reproduce. So it's just replicable, right? So it's the description of the sources, description on the steps. So you can maybe create not identical, but substantially similar data set based on that. And that is equivalent with the minimum requirement for OSI open source AI definition. And these are data sets, for example, like CR4 or MC4. The second tier is the one that's not only replicable, but it's also open access. And there were a lot of the data set creators that were in the convening that were creating these ones. It was just not only replicable, but also free, not free, but available to download, right? It enables the dataset user to download it, so it's basically open access. But there is no claim about the license compliance, right? So there were datasets such as Alluter AI's first pile, Dolma, FineWeb from Hugging Face, and so on. And then like the last tier, the fully open, adds the actual compliance, the super important but also very difficult thing to do. That corresponds with the Open Knowledge Foundation's definition of actually open source that enables the dataset user to reuse, share, modify. So most of the open Creative Commons licenses. And here we have the example of the Common Pile by Alluter AI and Common Corpus by Playas. So just shortly, I'm representing here a little bit like the work that Alluter AI actually did on that. And if you would like to have like really detailed walkthrough how they did it and all of the challenges, I recommend a talk that has been recorded at OCI's Deep Dive Governance conference lately. I'm happy to send you the link. So here, just short. So Alluter AI, they really wish to prove Sam Altman wrong. And really do the meticulous and detailed work of creating a data set that is fully compliant, only from verified open license, and then actually train an LLM on it that will perform well. And in order to do that, they said that they would need to know the license of each document not only the data set, because that's a different thing. The license that is on a data set as a whole is not the same as the license of in each of the document. So they would know the license for each of the document. They would have a reason to believe that that license information is correct. And then that license would meet the standards for an open license. And of course, they ask you, say, how hard can it be? It turned out to be extremely hard, but not impossible. Oh, I see my emoji is converted into a PowerPoint, but it's still the exploding head emoji. It's there because the challenge was huge, but they stayed really on it. And I'm not going to go through all of the challenges. You can find them in the research paper, or as I said, listen to Stella's talk. But I think the one that caused them the most problem is the metadata that is missing. So here I have an example, actually stolen from Stella's presentation here, how it looked like when they're trying to find the data sets that were public. They couldn't find the author for many of them. The terms of service were missing, and they came across such claims as various open data, which, as you can imagine, what is that, right? Could be anything. So for their standards, that was not enough. Wait, I want to go back. No. Wait, how do I go back? Oh no, I ruined it. You can do it. Can I, how do I? How do I go back? Longer time until caipirinha. One more, back. One more back. Yeah, thank you. So the relevant metadata is incomplete. That's a huge problem, but also there is a lot of data laundering, and they kind of coined this phrase, which I find quite accurate. They found that a lot of the data sets that they found on GitHub, for example, when they start poking around and checking and sending emails, if the metadata is actually what it says, is they found them incorrect. So that, of course, gave them a pause, and they had to do a lot of manual work. For example, looking at YouTube CC licensing, they created a list of kind of verified and trustworthy sources that they did a lot of mailing back and forth to actually make sure that they are trusted and they can rely on the licensing that is there. But they finally did that. But they finally did it. It took much longer than we thought, but they did create a data set that was big enough. There's 8 terabytes of openly licensed data sets. It's called Common Pile. You can find a white paper on it. It's on arXiv. And that data set consisted of 470,000 hours of transcribed audio content, 200 billion words from Common Crawl that they also verified licensing of, a lot of public domain books, which most of these public domain books, as you can imagine, is one of the challenges because they're very old. So then you have to ask yourself as well, are you introducing a bias to the data set? So they were fully aware of the challenges that brought in it. However, they did it, and they trained a model, LLM model on it. The model is called Comma, and tested it against openly other models trained on different corpora, and Comma outperforms consistently most of the models that were also openly licensed. So it's working really well. Congratulations to Eleter AI. And this is an email I got just recently from Sebastian Majstrowicz, who works at Eleter AI. I wanted before this presentation to make sure that I know how is Common Pile actually doing. And we both were in MozFest, and he sent me this one very enthusiastic email, as you can say, saying like, listen, almost everyone here I'm meeting at MozFest heard about Common Pile or is actually using it, including the Supercomputing Center in Barcelona, or the European Open Source AI project, even like some activists he met in a coffee queue. And then he heard this one anecdote about the European research project when one of the leaders of the project told him, like, we need to be really as diligent as Eleter AI because they proved it's actually possible to do that. So we should actually do that as well. So they shifted the framing of what people consider possible or impossible, so it's only upward from that, and I think this is really great news. Even if this is not a model on a caliber, of course, of GPT, it's something, and I think it gives a lot of hope. The second aspect is the governance, the community control governance, very fast. I personally think that, I think that's a fact that every data set is a governance system. And the ethos of the open source movement can be seen as a laboratory for figuring it out. I don't think, and what I see also with my work with the big companies, they're not very much in a rush to go in that direction, to give actual genuine community control to the data owners and communities. And I think even though we're moving at the spectrum of what openness means, it's not always the radical part of it, we should be experimenting from the point of the ethos of what we value as an open source community, such as collaboration, transparency, documentation, and giving control to the people. And I'm sure you're all pretty aware of the huge AI power asymmetries that we're dealing right now with right now, of the consent, licensing, compensation, community oversight, and so on. And I think experimenting with the governance from that point of view can help us at least create these pockets of proof of concepts, just like Luther did with the openly licensed data, that things are possible. Because it's not being said implicitly, but explicitly, but implicitly, when we look at what's happening in the AI ecosystem, nobody's actually really doing it. And here I wanted to give an example of Mozilla that's actually trying. Even though I'm not a staffer at Mozilla anymore, I find this project really inspiring and really bold in what it's trying to achieve. It is born out of the common voice data sets that you might know, the voice data set. It's a platform, and it's being spun out of Mozilla as a social enterprise called the Mozilla Data Collective that is something like a Hugging Face, but is giving all the controls to the communities. So the communities can choose the licensing, can choose the different considerations for the users. If you have a valuable language data set, for example, and you want it to give it to a specific AI project, not to the big one, you could do it with the levers that this platform is giving you. They also are planning to introduce payments for it, so I think that's like a big controversy in the open ecosystem. However, I think it's good that it's an experiment. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know how long will it last. Maybe forever, maybe just a year or two. But I think, for example, what Renata was saying, you want to have a big consultation on openness and so on. I think learnings from platforms like that and what the community actually are using and how they think about their data sets could be very valuable in redefining the openness for the next era. I think I need to come to an end. Just here, a little inspirational slide, I think. What I see when I look at the AI ecosystem now is an epistemologic crisis. The way we consume the knowledge is predefined by the big companies. I saw this interview with Sam Altman where he was pressing, was trying to say, yeah, we have this group of 100 ethicists and people who advise us of which kind of moral frameworks should be the default ones, how should the model behave. But in the end, he is the one who can actually override every decision. And that's a monarchy, basically. And I don't think we should be living in monarchies. We shouldn't be letting that happen, and it's happening right now. So the future must be open, collective, and accountable. It's easier said than done, but I think this kind of little experiments or big experiments that I talked about are bringing us closer to that future. And I have this part, but I think I'll just skip it because we're probably out of time. We also, as the research, we identified also the policy and tech investments in the research of the best practices. you know, the usual, the increasing open the availability, clarifying the legal set of those data, and so on. But I'm also happy to talk to you more about it later on. I was also happy to see that these priorities are reflected in a Mozilla open letter that was signed by many organizations present here, such as Open Knowledge Foundation, and this letter was presented at the Digital Sovereignty Summit that is happening right now in Berlin. And that's great. And I'm going to end here, I think. Thank